December 2025. I'm his daughter. The words, almost whispered into her ear by the black-clad stranger to her right, cut through Lucy like the cold precision of an assassin's blade, striking straight to the centre of her heart. She turned towards the woman who had spoken as she scattered a handful of soil onto the coffin of Lucy's dead husband, now resting in the cold winter ground. The vicar murmured the final prayers, his breath forming clouds of mist in the air, before the small gathering of mourners made their way back to the crisp path where their shoes crunched over gravel and brittle fallen leaves. For someone who, in his own words, had been a big cheese, the turnout for Simon Hart's funeral was decidedly modest. It was the 22nd of December, and the churchyard felt bare and raw, the winter trees stripped down to stark branches that clawed at the grey overcast sky in search of sunlight that was not forthcoming. A murder of crows circled overhead, their harsh cries almost mocking in tone, as they flocked around in that uncanny way they always seemed to at funerals, as if they sensed what was taking place. The church stood in a village just south of the Thames in Surrey, amid the affluent belt of commuter towns just outside the M25. It was the sort found in hundreds of old English parishes, full of centuries-old gravestones leaning at tired angles, the names of the deceased barely legible after hundreds of years of weathering. There was little room here for further burials these days, but Simon, fearful of cremation, had reserved this spot a long time ago, in the grounds of the very church he and Lucy had got married in some 45 years before. Doubtless he had not expected to go quite so soon, struck down by a heart attack at the age of 70, not long after retiring. All those high-powered, stressful years in the heart of London's finance district had finally caught up with him. Lucy studied the woman again, wondering which of Simon's floozies he had knocked up to produce her. There had been plenty of them, so this hadn't come as a great surprise, shocking though the revelation was. It would have helped to narrow it down if she had known her name, but this was hardly the time for introductions. She looked to be about 35, with dark hair pulled back and a thick black coat. She seemed remarkably calm and composed, with no obvious signs of grief, yet Lucy instinctively knew she was telling the truth. She could see Simon's eyes in hers. Now she would have to work out what to do about it, because after decades of turning a blind eye to Simon spreading his seed across London with cheerful abandon, here was the evidence of his philandering right in front of her, impossible to ignore. A feeling of dread expanded within her. The last thing she needed was some soap opera-style scene full of revelations and recriminations. Her son and daughter were only a few paces away, exchanging a few words with the vicar, and Lucy could not allow them to hear this, not here, not now. She needed to buy a little time, which meant acknowledging the stranger without drawing attention to her. Lucy leaned closer, lowered her voice, and said, "This isn't an appropriate time or place to talk about this. Can we speak later, somewhere private?" The woman looked her straight in the eye, then gave a small, cool nod. "Fine." Her turning up was the last thing Lucy needed, as if the day hadn't been horrible enough already, but she would have to try to push it to the back of her mind for the moment. That wasn't going to be easy. Now that the ceremony was completed, the group was already heading back towards the front of the church. The mourners included a handful of Simon's former city colleagues, all in tailored suits and polished shoes, a few neighbours, some extended family members, and her own son and daughter, Adam and Emma. These were Simon's legitimate children, who for the moment were blissfully unaware of the new sibling who had just announced herself. She caught the eye of her sister Donna, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold, who seemed to have attracted the attention of a slick-haired man Lucy vaguely recognised from one of Simon's corporate dinner parties years earlier. Donna gave her a brief smile, with a look that seemed to be asking Lucy for permission to flirt. This was just like Donna. She had been like this her entire life, always on the lookout for a man, even at a funeral. Lucy joined the others walking back towards the church entrance, taking Emma's arm on her left, her daughter's face still marked with tears, and Adam on her right, cold and stony-faced. He and his father hadn't got on. Lucy gripped them tightly, wanting to make a show of solidarity in front of the woman who had just gate-crashed their world. Her mind reeled at the potential consequences of what her existence could mean, but right now she needed to make an announcement before people began to leave. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the freezing winter air, and trying to keep her voice steady and strong, said, "You are all welcome back at the house." It was the expected thing to say, and most of them had assumed as much in any case. But now she was grimly aware that she had just given an open invitation into her world to the unknown newcomer. It was a short journey of less than half a mile back to their home, with the rest of the mourners following Lucy and her children in the funeral car. She sat between Adam and Emma, hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring out as the village slipped by. She felt drained and hollowed out, and not just by the strain of dealing with her husband's death. The emptiness came from decades of lack of fulfillment, made all the worse by the presence of the stranger, an unwelcome ingredient added into an already sour mix. The house came into view as they turned down a narrow lane on the outskirts of the village. A large 19th century property with soft cream walls and a thatched roof that dipped neatly over the upstairs windows. It was the sort of place that only those who had done well in life would be able to afford. It stood back from the lane behind low hedges with generous open gardens and a gravel drive with space for at least half a dozen cars, all of which would be needed today. Lucy had no idea how much the place was worth now, only that they had paid £350,000 for it in the late 1980s, when they moved from their old house in the nearest town after Simon had made his first million. That didn't sound much by today's standards, but it was a tidy sum back then. Now it was all hers, or so she had thought. The presence of the stranger had sown a seed of doubt about that. She was desperate to find out more about her, but first she had to receive her guests. She stood in the spacious porch, greeting each of them in turn as they came in and offered their condolences. There were about 20 people in total, including the mysterious woman who had come alone. She was one of the first to step inside, and Lucy did not feel comfortable about that at all. All she could do, in full view of everyone, was smile and thank her for coming as she disappeared into the house, leaving Lucy to deal with the rest, each telling her their own variation of how sorry they were. Then they filtered into the house, which was festooned with Christmas decorations and dominated by a large tree in the living room, put up a few days before Simon's death 3 weeks earlier. The glitziness of it all felt completely at odds with the somber mood. All that was missing, thought Lucy, to complete the surreal atmosphere was Last Christmas playing in the background. As people drifted towards the kitchen where the buffet and drinks were laid out, Lucy cast a glance behind her, trying to see where the woman had gone, but there was no sign of her. Even when she checked the living room and dining room, she could not see her anywhere, which filled her with further unease. She did not want this stranger wandering freely through her home, nosing around. What was her motivation for being here? Was it money? There had to be some reason she had come out of the woodwork after all these years. It was only a matter of time before Lucy would have to confront her, and she felt a small sense of relief when she finally spotted her in conversation in the conservatory with one of Simon's old stockbroker friends, the same man who had been chatting up Donna earlier. Her sister had her hands full, handing out drinks and playing the perfect hostess, knowing how tough all this was on Lucy. Good old Donna. She could be a pain in the arse and frustratingly unreliable at times, but she had always been fiercely loyal to her sister. Finally, after about an hour, Lucy got her opportunity. She noticed the woman slipping away again, and a jolt of irritation ran through her. Where was she going now? For another snoop around the house? As it turned out, she was only heading to the downstairs toilet, so Lucy followed and waited for her in the hallway until the woman emerged. "Right, I think you and I need to have a little talk, don't you?" said Lucy. "Fine by me," replied the woman. "It's about time we got all this out in the open." "Not here," said Lucy quickly, spotting another mourner approaching the bathroom behind her. "This way." She led the woman along a long tiled corridor lined with signed paintings that Simon had paid serious money for, just one indicator of the wealth that every room in the property exuded. As they walked, she could see her visitor eyeing it all up approvingly, convincing her further that this woman had well and truly got the scent of money in her nostrils. At the end of the corridor, well away from the other guests, was Simon's old study, a room he had always treated as his personal sanctuary. He had made it quite clear Lucy was not welcome there, but he could not keep her out now, so she led the way in and closed the door firmly behind them. The room was spacious, book-lined and orderly, with a mahogany desk that dominated the centre and Simon's laptop still open but frustratingly inaccessible. He'd covered his tracks well over the years, and with good reason, given the day's developments. Something about this room had always made Lucy feel uncomfortable, and since his death, she had felt as if his ghost was constantly watching over her, disapproving and poised to deliver some patronizing remark. But for now, for reasons of privacy, it was the best place to be. There were two questions on her lips that needed answering before anything else. Who was this woman, and more importantly, who was her mother? Had it been someone Lucy had known? "Look," she began, "this is not on, you know. It is stressful enough for me burying my husband without you turning up like this, claiming to be his long-lost daughter on today of all days. I don't even know your name." "It's Clara," replied the woman. "Clara what?" "Temple." Lucy thought deeply, reaching into her memories, but drew a blank. The name Temple meant nothing to her, so perhaps it hadn't been someone she had known. It could have been anyone, really. She knew full well Simon had had dozens of affairs, flings, and goodness knows what else. She didn't even want to think about his so-called business trips to Thailand and what might have gone on there. "Temple is my married name," clarified Clara, as if reading her thoughts. "Why didn't you bring your husband with you today?" "He didn't feel up to it." Lucy was tempted to inquire why, but didn't want to get bogged down in small talk about whatever might be ailing her other half. "Right, so what was your maiden name?" "Green." This could have been another knife blow to the heart if Lucy had cared any more, but she was long past that. Instantly her thoughts turned to Janice Green, Simon's secretary, or PA as he liked to grandly call her, from the early 1990s. Lucy remembered that being a particularly dismal period during her marriage. The wealth Simon had accumulated during the late 1980s boom had gone to his head, and he truly thought he was something special by then, condescending, manipulative, and devious. He considered that acquiring money entitled him to do whatever the hell he wanted, and if it was at the expense of other people, well, they were just collateral damage. That included helping himself to any woman he took a fancy to, and sadly all too many were only too willing to oblige. She had been convinced that something had been going on with Janice, as it was blatantly obvious whenever they encountered each other at social events, with all those furtive glances people having affairs can't help betraying themselves with. Then there had been all the nights working late and weekends away on business. Any attempts by her to confront him over these things had been dismissed as paranoid delusions, part of a process she later learnt was known as gaslighting. "Is your mother's name Janice?" asked Lucy, almost certain she would confirm that to be the case. "It was," said Clara. "She died 3 years ago. That was when I found out Simon was my dad. She told me on her deathbed, and then I went to seek him out." "He didn't mention any of this to me," said Lucy. "No, well, he wouldn't have done," said Clara. "From what he told me, you were a cold, unloving wife to him. No wonder he fell in love with my mother." These blatant untruths did not faze Lucy. It was to be expected. She had long suspected he had spent their married life slagging her off behind her back. "Well, Clara," said Lucy, "far be it from me to shatter any of your illusions about dear old Daddy, but it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that he'd paint that sort of picture of me. The truth is, he was a self-obsessed, narcissistic man who treated me like shit throughout our marriage. He expected me to be the dutiful little wife at home, cooking, cleaning, looking pretty for his city slicker pals, all while bringing up his children with no help from him. For example, he never changed a single nappy." "He was very busy with his career," said Clara. "You should have been grateful he took such good care of you. I'm sure you got plenty out of it." "Hardly. He kept me short of money, wouldn't let me have a career of my own, and belittled and patronized me at every opportunity. That's the real sort of man your father was." "If that's the case, why didn't you leave him?" It was a question Lucy found painfully difficult to answer, one she'd asked herself more times than she could count. Somehow there were always more reasons to stay than to leave, all woven into a web from which she'd lacked either the courage or the conviction to break free. He'd been the key architect in all this, tightening the strands year by year, crushing her spirit bit by bit, until all the fight had been drained out of her. "Because he made it impossible for me to leave him," said Lucy quietly. "Every time there was even the hint of an escape route, he closed it off." "I'm sorry, that just sounds pathetic," said Clara. "You're just making excuses. If you were strong enough, you'd have left him long ago. I think perhaps you enjoyed your nice, comfortable lifestyle rather more than you're making out. You knew a good thing when you saw it." Lucy was determined to fight her corner, even though some of Clara's words were uncomfortably close to the bone. Familiar currents of self-doubt and loathing began to swirl within her, questioning the motives behind her staying with him so long. She knew it was vital to suppress these negative thoughts and try not to lose sight of the truth that if she had been weak, it was only because he had made her that way. "Well, whatever the reason, it's all over now. He's gone, and quite frankly, good riddance. And I still have Emma and Adam. They know all about what he was like." "Poison their minds against him, did you?" asked Clara cruelly. "You know that's one of the most wicked things a parent can do." "Hardly. They aren't stupid. They grew up living with both of us and are more than capable of forming their own opinions. Adam's barely spoken to him for years." "Yes, well, speaking of Emma and Adam, I think it's about time you introduced me to them. I'm sure they'll be pleased to hear they've got a new sister." "Somehow I doubt it," said Lucy, "and I'm certainly not telling them today. That would be completely insensitive." "Suit yourself, but you better get on and do it soon because it's the will reading tomorrow." "You know about that?" "Oh yes," said Clara. "The solicitor contacted me about it, And Simon told me a year or two ago that he was making a new one, so it will be very interesting, won't it? I'll see you there tomorrow afternoon. Then we'll all know where we stand, won't we? It's a lovely house you've got here, by the way. She cast her eyes slowly around the study, taking in the expensive wood panelling and more of Simon's paintings, leaving Lucy in no doubt what she was thinking. Clara wanted to get her hands on all this, which was the last thing she needed. With Simon gone, she'd at least hoped she'd have the comfort of her home and the security it offered. Now, it seemed, she was standing on increasingly shaky ground. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't send the conversation spiraling further into hostility, so Lucy opened the study door and stepped aside, ushering Clara out. "I think we better go back to the others," she said. "And please, do me the courtesy of not outing yourself to anyone else here. It can wait until tomorrow." Clara gave her a cool, satisfied smirk, then swept out of the room without a backward glance. Lucy waited a moment, letting her breathing settle before following her down the corridor. By the time she reached the kitchen, Clara had already rejoined the remaining guests, chatting with an ease that made Lucy's skin crawl. Already she was acting as if she owned the place. The rest of the wake drifted by in a blur. Conversations ebbed and flowed around her, but she barely registered any of them, given how consumed she was by worry. Her mind kept circling back to Emma and Adam. Should she tell them today? No, provided Clara didn't blab, it could wait. Before they left, she invited both over for lunch the following day, drawing their attention to the mountains of leftover buffet food that would need eating. She had overestimated by some degree how many people would show up. Tomorrow they could have lunch and then travel together to the solicitor's office for the 3 o'clock appointment. That would give ample time to tell them about Clara. The house felt cold and empty once the last car had rolled down the drive and back out into the lane, despite the fire that had been roaring in the living room all afternoon. Both Emma and Adam had offered to stay the night, but she needed time on her own to mull things over. It was dark by now, and the Christmas tree lights blinked steadily in the corner, far too cheerful for the melancholy mood that had been hanging over her all afternoon. She sat in front of the fire with the remains of a good bottle of wine beside her, reflecting on not only the day, but also on the entire 46 years since she had first met Simon. The sorry truth was there had been more than an element of truth in Clara's accusations. Saying she had not been strong enough to leave had sounded pathetic, and no wonder Clara had picked her up on it. But why had she never found the strength? Had it been her fault? After so many years, it was almost impossible to get a clear perspective on things that had happened so long ago. She tried to picture herself in her old shoes. The mother of 2 small children, feeling trapped as the man she had married gradually turned out not to be the person she thought he was. But it was all so long ago. If only she could go back, relive it, and try to understand it all better. But right now, there were far more things to worry about here in the present day. Reaching for her phone, she decided it was time to begin playing detective, starting with Facebook, which seemed as good a place as any. It took less than a minute to find who she was looking for. Clara Temple had a sparse profile, with little more available publicly than a few photos of young children and a profile picture of herself in a black t-shirt in which she looked younger and slimmer. There was no hint of wealth, no luxury holidays or check-ins at smart restaurants, just ordinary snapshots of an ordinary life and a few bare details. It appeared she had worked as an assistant in a care home at some point and was married to a man called Mark Temple, whose profile offered even less information. Lucy stared at the screen, wondering how much time Simon had spent with Clara since he'd found out about her. It was no surprise he had kept her a secret. Why would he have bothered to tell her? And was she his only secret love child? With his grubby lifestyle, there could be others waiting in the wings. For all she knew, he might have more children than Boris Johnson. If only she could have found his way into his phone or laptop. How many affairs had he had? She fell asleep on the sofa and woke the next morning with the sort of dull, heavy head that a bottle and a half of wine will bring. The fire had burnt itself out and she was cold, but she felt calmer. The previous day had threatened to overwhelm her, but those feelings had subsided now, leaving her solid enough to face what lay ahead. First up was the conversation with Emma and Adam, something she could no longer put off. They gathered for lunch, picking at the chilled remains of the buffet food, chicken legs and quiche, as she prepared to tell them everything. At least it was only the two of them, as her grandchildren were safely at home with their partners, as on the previous day. This allowed Lucy the space she needed to bring them up to speed on developments. She told them everything, from the revelation at the graveside to the conversation in Simon's study. Shock rippled across their faces, a mix of anger and disbelief as the reality of what all this could mean settled in. Neither of them was naive enough to believe Simon had been a faithful or loving husband. They had seen and heard plenty over the years to suggest otherwise, but the existence of a half-sister was a blow they had not been expecting. By the time they climbed into Adam's car to head to Windsor, a few miles to the north, none of them was under any illusion about what they might be up against. When they arrived at the solicitor's office, a converted Georgian townhouse, Clara was already in the waiting room. She hadn't come dressed up for the occasion, just wearing a baggy fleece and jeans, in contrast to her smarter attire the previous day. What hadn't changed was the same cold expression she had worn before, suggesting she knew exactly what she had come for. Lucy felt incredibly uncomfortable at having to make the introductions, and stopped short of using any words like sister or brother, offering only names. Thankfully, the uncomfortable situation was quickly cut short, because for the first time Lucy could ever recall, they had encountered a solicitor who was ready to see them at the appointed time. The four of them were ushered into the room of Mr. Hegarty, a middle-aged, smartly dressed man who, after some brief preamble, began reading out the details of the will. They were all impatient for him to get to the bones of the matter, with the exception of Clara, whose relaxed demeanour suggested she already knew what was on the cards. Simon must have told her. Therefore, as per Mr. Hart's instructions, the estate, including the property at which Mrs. Hart currently resides, is to be divided equally. One half to you, Mrs. Hart, and the other half to Mrs. Temple. There was a stunned silence before Emma found her voice. "He can't do that," said Emma. "That's our family home and legacy." "I'm rather afraid he has," said Clara, smiling sweetly. "What right have you got to any of it?" continued Emma angrily. "Do we have any evidence you're even his daughter? I demand a DNA test." "I've already had one, sister dearest, and it was a perfect match. I'm so looking forward to getting to know you better, now we're all family." "Over my dead body," said Emma, storming out of the office, adding, "You're no sister of mine," for good measure, before she slammed the door behind her. "How is all of this going to work?" asked Adam, trying to keep a cool head in the wake of his sister's outburst. "In practical terms, it means the property will be jointly owned. Any decisions regarding its sale, transfer, or division would require agreement from both parties, including if one chooses to buy out the other's share," explained Mr. Hegarty. "And what if neither of us can afford to do that?" asked Lucy. "Then the property will likely have to be sold and the proceeds divided." Clara leaned back in her chair entirely at ease, as if this were nothing more than a routine administrative matter. She looked pleased as punch, and why wouldn't she? After all, she was the one with everything to gain out of this. "I can assure you that I have no intention of moving out of my home," said Lucy, trying to tough it out. "None at all." "Well, I want my share," said Clara. "So we'll have to find a solution, won't we?" Whatever solution Clara had in mind was not forthcoming that afternoon, and in the end a very uneasy truce was reached, with the agreement that they would discuss it again after the festive season, given that the next day was Christmas Eve. Despite everything that had happened, the traditional Hart family Christmas was going ahead as planned, because Lucy was determined the grandchildren should not miss out on the magical experience that it was for children at their age. Emma and Adam were both married with 2 children each, and with 6 bedrooms in the house, there was plenty of space for them all. It had become the established routine for the families to come every year, arriving on Christmas Eve and staying until Boxing Day, and Lucy saw no reason why this year should be any different. It was one of the reasons she had insisted on squeezing the funeral in before the big day, because otherwise it would have had to wait until New Year, and she didn't want that hanging over the celebrations. She'd prepared the usual luxurious Christmas feast, determined to return to some semblance of normality. With 4 lively youngsters aged between 3 and 7, the house radiated life and warmth from the moment they arrived, filled with laughter, excitement, and anticipation all around. It was exactly the kind of joy Lucy needed to experience right now, to take her mind off the weighty matters of recent days. She had agreed with Emma, Adam, and their partners that talk of the will would be strictly off limits during the day while the children were around. It was only once the little ones were tucked up in bed waiting for Father Christmas that the adults were able to discuss it over a few drinks. The atmosphere was understandably muted compared to earlier years, but Lucy stressed that she wanted the next day to be an occasion of joy. In the morning, the excitement of presents and new toys got the day off to a good start, with the dinner being every bit the celebration she'd hoped it would be. The children missed their grandfather, of course, but were too young to fully grasp what had happened. And despite everything Simon had done, Lucy still felt she ought to propose a small toast to him over dinner, more for the children's sake than anything else. The day soon passed. Boxing Day followed, and by late afternoon the family had all gone, leaving the house silent once again. As darkness fell, the full weight of it all finally hit her. She had been putting on a brave face for days, but now she was alone, and the uncertainty over the future was beginning to eat away at her more than ever. Perhaps this was all for the best, and selling the house might be the practical choice and a chance for a fresh start. But on the flip side, she had lived here for 36 years, and the thought of leaving it all behind was almost unthinkable. She simply could not imagine living anywhere else. She thought about seeking some professional legal advice, but trying to find any solicitor available between Christmas and New Year proved to be a complete non-starter. Left with no other option, she resorted to the good old fallback of Google, typing in a few tentative search terms relating to her situation, almost fearful of what she might find. What followed was an hour of trawling through a tangled web of horror stories on Reddit and elsewhere, people describing battles over wills that had dragged on for years, tearing families apart and draining bank accounts dry. By the time she'd finished, she wished she hadn't bothered, as all she had done was fuel the fear that this nightmare with Clara was only just beginning. Her misgivings were well-founded because on New Year's Eve, things took a decidedly ugly turn. She had been enjoying a quiet morning, pottering about in the kitchen with a mug of coffee, when the doorbell rang, followed by a persistent hammering on the front door. Whoever it was, it sounded urgent. On opening it, she was instantly overwhelmed. Without so much as a by your leave, Clara, in a baggy sweatshirt and joggers, barged straight past her, lugging a cheap plastic suitcase and barking something over her shoulder at the 2 children trailing behind her. A man who looked to be in his late 30s followed, muscular but with a noticeable paunch, also pulling a suitcase. Before Lucy could say a word, the children tore past her into the hallway at full pelt, shrieking with the unrestrained energy of the completely undisciplined. One of them cannoned straight into the oak cabinet against the far wall that held a collection of her late mother's ornaments. An antique teapot wobbled, tipped, and crashed to the floor, shattering into a dozen pieces. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" said Lucy, staring in horror at the smashed remains. "Oh, sorry about that," said Clara, as breezily as if someone had dropped a few breadcrumbs on the floor. "He can't help it. He's got ADHD. "I'm sure he has, but aren't you even going to tell him off? That teapot belonged to my great-grandmother and was over 80 years old. "No, I'm not. Telling him off will only make it worse. You clearly haven't been educated on what it's like to have a child with special needs. You must have overexcited him when you opened the door." "And has he been officially diagnosed?" "Well, no. You know what doctors are like. Useless. But I filled in an online questionnaire and it says he's got it." Lucy watched the 2 children tear off along the corridor towards Simon's old study, whooping and hollering as though the house were one large adventure playground. "Now look, this is outrageous," said Lucy sharply. "This is my house." "Our house," corrected Clara, in a tone that left Lucy in no doubt she meant business. "Remember, I own half of it now, which means I've got every right to live here." Lucy turned to the man who had set his suitcase down and had begun wandering towards the kitchen. "Have you got any beer?" he asked. "No," she replied, "and even if I did, I wouldn't generally be offering it to a visitor before lunch." "I'm guessing you're her husband, right?" "Yes, I'm Mark." "And what do you think about all this?" she asked, in the faint hope that he might be more reasonable than his wife. "Well, if Clara owns half this place, it seems silly to keep paying rent on ours, especially since we're 3 months behind and the landlord's threatening to throw us out. I can't work, you see." "Why not? What do you do?" "I'm a roofer, but I can't face it at the moment. It's the anxiety, you see. I suffer from vertigo." He didn't look remotely anxious. In fact, he looked remarkably relaxed, as though nothing in life had ever troubled him. He must have thought he had won the lottery when Clara told him about the will. As for why he had chosen roofing as a profession if he suffered from vertigo, she didn't even want to go there. Clara pushed past Lucy again, heading for the kitchen. "So, you see, there's no point throwing money away on rent when we've got this beautiful place to live in for free. So we're moving in today." Lucy stared at her, speechless. The sheer boldness of it. The absolute gall. "Without even asking me first." "We thought it would be a nice surprise. After all, we're family now," said Clara. "It's only right that we should live together. Though, of course, I wouldn't stand in your way if you decided you wanted to move on. How old are you now?" 65. "Yes, well, maybe downsizing might be the best choice for you. A nice bungalow or something. I mean, all those stairs. They get to be quite a challenge at your age, don't they?" "I'm perfectly fit and healthy, thank you," replied Lucy. "Shall I go and get the dogs out of the car?" asked Mark. "Dogs?" said Lucy. "How many?" "Just 2, said Clara. "Lucy won't mind, will you, Lucy? You're not one of those awful people who don't like dogs, are you?" She wasn't, but she had never had any particular desire to own one. She had until a few months ago had a cat, but she had passed on at the ripe old age of 20, which was probably just as well under the circumstances, as Mark had already gone out to fetch their pets. He returned moments later with 2 large, boisterous dogs. One was a sandy-coloured Labrador, and the other a black Springer Spaniel, both already worked up and barking as they bounded straight past Lucy into the house. They skidded across the tiles, tails whipping wildly, leaving muddy paw prints in every direction as they tore down the hall after the children. Lucy was finding the whole situation intolerable, and within an hour it had escalated completely out of control. This was no mere inconvenience. This was an invasion. Clara, Mark, the children and the dogs had scattered themselves across the house as if mapping out territory, poking their noses into every nook and cranny, opening cupboards without permission, and leaving Lucy feeling violated in every pore. It was one long catalogue of woe. It didn't take Mark long to find himself a drink, uncorking one of Simon's vintage bottles of wine, a rare Bordeaux worth at least £500, and pouring it straight into one of Lucy's favourite coffee mugs. He took a long swig as if he were drinking beer and declared it to be rough plonk, but it didn't stop him from guzzling the rest of it. Meanwhile, the children and dogs, none of whom appeared to be subject to any discipline whatsoever, were merrily wrecking the place. Perhaps the dogs had ADHD too and also couldn't be upset, mused Lucy. The final straw was when Clara suggested that it made sense for her and Mark to have the master bedroom since they were a couple and Lucy was on her own. Her solution was that Lucy should move into one of the smaller rooms at the back of the house where it would be quieter. With what Lucy had seen so far, it was unlikely that anywhere in her home would ever be quiet again. It had been one humiliation after another, piling up so quickly that she could scarcely process it all. She was still trying to muster the strength to fight back, furious as she was at Clara's proposed reorganization of the sleeping arrangements, when the doorbell rang again. "Are you expecting anyone else?" asked Lucy, fearing more feral members of the Temple clan descending upon her. "No," said Clara, who was currently rummaging through the kitchen cupboards. "Have you got any Cocoa Pops? Taylor only eats Cocoa Pops. She doesn't like any other cereal." "Cereal? But it's lunchtime," said Lucy. "Oh yeah, she has them for lunch. And tea. Oh, and do you have any normal sugar I can put on them? I can only find brown." "I don't have Cocoa Pops, and if I did, I certainly wouldn't put sugar on them," said Lucy, leaving her to it and heading out of the kitchen towards the front door, praying it would be a friendly face who might be able to offer a shred of moral support. That hope vanished the moment she opened it. A stranger stood there, a middle-aged man she guessed to be in his late 50s. "Can I help you?" she asked, wondering who on earth this might be. It wasn't another long-lost relative crawling out of the woodwork to stake a claim, was it? If so, that really would be the final nail in the coffin. But this man couldn't be another love child, surely. He was too old. "Actually, I think it's me that's here to help you," said the man. "Oh, God," said Lucy. "What are you selling?" "Honestly, nothing," he said. "I just want a few moments of your time. Can I come in?" "Yeah, that's what the bloke selling tea towels said. And after he'd left, I noticed he'd nicked one of the candlesticks." There was a loud crash from somewhere behind her, followed by the sound of one of the children screaming and one of the dogs howling as the other barked like crazy. "It sounds like you've got your hands full," said the man. "I'm Robbie, by the way." "Lucy," she said. "Now, as you can hear, this really isn't a good time." "Well, I don't have to come in," he said. "We could talk out here, or go to a cafe." "It's freezing," she said, "and I can't leave the house right now." She wouldn't have put it past Clara to change the locks if she didn't stay put. Having a bad day, huh? That would be the understatement of the year. Yeah, that figures. It was much the same for me. "What was?" asked Lucy. "If you'd just let me in, I'll explain." Look, you're letting cold air in. It's not convenient right now, so you've got 10 seconds to tell me what you want, and if I don't like it, then I'm shutting the door.